The afternoon sun was bright, and a cool breeze brushed against the wide stone walls of the government building. Flags moved gently in the wind as cars lined up outside. It was an important day, a public event meant to honor those who had served the country. People walked around in neat clothes, greeting one another and taking pictures near the entrance. The security guards stood tall near the gate, scanning everyone with quick eyes and firm voices. Amid the busy crowd, an elderly man slowly made his way toward the main gate. His clothes were simple, a faded jacket, worn shoes, and a cap that looked older than him. On his jacket, a few medals glimmered faintly under the sunlight. His steps were slow and uneven. One leg dragged slightly as he walked. Still, there was pride in the way he carried himself, the kind of quiet strength that only time and experience could shape. When he reached the security post, one of the guards stopped him with a raised hand. The old man smiled politely and said he had been invited as a guest to attend the event. The guard looked him up and down, a smirk forming on his face. "You a guest here?" he said, half laughing. Another guard joined in, shaking his head. They whispered to each other, thinking the old man couldn't hear. One of them said, "He probably just wants to sneak in for free food." The old man's smile faded a little. He reached into his pocket and carefully pulled out a folded piece of paper, his invitation letter. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. He showed it to the guards, explaining that he had received it from the department last week. The guards barely glanced at it. "This looks fake," one of them said, folding his arms. "You expect us to believe they invited someone like you?" The other laughed quietly, saying, "Look at his shoes, man. They probably found him outside the bus station." The old man stayed calm. He didn't shout or argue. He just said softly, "I served this country once. I was told my service still mattered." But his words didn't move them. One of the guards replied sharply, "Look, old man, we don't have time for stories. Please move aside before we call the police." People around began to glance in their direction. Some paused for a moment, curious about what was going on, but no one stepped forward to help. They had their own reasons. Some didn't want trouble, others simply assumed the guards were right. The old man took a deep breath, folded his invitation carefully, and stepped aside. He looked up at the flags waving above the building, his eyes wet but his face steady. He found a spot on the steps near the entrance, a little away from the crowd. He sat down quietly, resting his cane beside him. His knees ached, and the long walk had left him tired. The sound of the ceremony inside could be heard faintly. People clapping, a speaker talking about the importance of honoring heroes. The irony didn't escape him. He smiled sadly, thinking how strange life could be. The same place that once celebrated him was now closed to him. A few minutes passed. People continued entering through the gate while the guards checked their passes. The old man stayed where he was, looking at the medals on his chest. Each one carried a story of courage, loss, and loyalty. He ran his fingers gently over one of them, remembering the faces of his friends from years ago. So many of them were gone now. He wondered what they would think if they saw this moment. Just then, a small boy walked by with his mother. The boy noticed the medals and stopped. He tugged on his mother's sleeve, asking who the man was. The mother smiled awkwardly and told him to keep walking, but the boy slipped from her hand and stepped closer. "Sir, what are these shiny things?" he asked, pointing to the medals. The old man's face softened. He smiled warmly at the boy. "These? They are medals for service. I earned them when I was younger," he said gently. The boy's eyes lit up. "Were you a soldier?" The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, a long time ago. I served with many brave men. We fought to protect this country." The boy sat down beside him, fascinated. He listened as the old man told him one short story, about a cold night when he and his team had rescued villagers trapped during a storm. He spoke in simple words, not showing off, just remembering. The boy listened closely, almost forgetting the world around him. For a moment, the old man felt like someone had seen him again, not as a stranger, but as a person who had lived and given something valuable. When the boy's mother came to take him away, she smiled at the old man too. She whispered a soft thank you before walking off. The boy waved as he left, and the old man raised his hand in return. It was a small moment, but it warmed his heart. As time passed, the crowd outside thinned. The guards were still at their post, joking with each other. They didn't even notice that a journalist had stepped outside, watching everything quietly. He had seen the boy talking to the old man and sensed there was more to this story. But the old man didn't know that yet. He just sat there thinking about how easily people forget, how quickly respect fades when the uniform is gone. The wind grew colder as the afternoon stretched on. The old man pulled his jacket tighter. He looked at the grand building again and whispered under his breath almost to himself, "All I wanted was to sit in there and remember my friends." There was no anger in his voice, only a quiet sadness. The guards, unaware of what they had done, carried on with their duty as if nothing had happened. But something had changed that day. A small act of disrespect had been seen by a few eyes that would soon tell the world. And for the old man sitting alone on the steps, it was another reminder that real honor doesn't come from ceremonies. It comes from the way people treat one another, even when no one else is watching. The story was only beginning, though he didn't know it yet. The same gate that had turned him away would soon open wide, and the same people who ignored him would soon stand in silence, realizing who they had disrespected. The old man sat quietly on the steps, his eyes following the shadows of people moving in and out of the building. He didn't want to cause a scene, but inside he felt small and forgotten. The laughter of the guards echoed near the gate. They were still talking about him, thinking he couldn't hear, but every word reached him clearly. He had faced bullets, storms, and hunger in the past. Yet somehow this moment, this quiet insult, felt heavier than all of it. One of the guards looked back and saw the old man still sitting there. He rolled his eyes and said to the other, "He's still here. Doesn't he get it? We told him to leave." The other laughed and said, "Maybe he's waiting for someone to pity him." They both chuckled, not realizing how cruel their words sounded. The old man didn't respond. He simply looked at the medals again, remembering what each one meant. Every ribbon carried a story of sacrifice, of nights spent in cold trenches, of friends who never made it home. A few people passed by, whispering to each other. One woman said softly, "Poor man, maybe he's lost." But no one went closer. Everyone was too caught up in their own worlds. Inside the building, the speeches had begun. The host's voice echoed from the speakers, talking about bravery, sacrifice, and the importance of honoring those who fought for the nation. The old man could hear every word, and each one felt like a bitter joke. His stomach rumbled softly. He hadn't eaten since morning. The long walk in the sun had drained his energy. He took out a small bottle of water from his bag and took a slow sip. He wasn't angry at the guards, he pitied them. They were young, maybe too young to understand what it meant to give everything for a country that sometimes forgets its heroes. After a while, a small sound caught his attention. It was the same little boy who had spoken to him earlier. The boy had come back, this time without his mother. He looked worried. "Sir, my father wants to meet you," the boy said, his voice full of excitement. The old man blinked in surprise. "Your father?" The boy nodded eagerly. "He said he wants to talk to you. He's inside, but he asked me to find you." The old man hesitated. "I don't think they'll let me in," he said softly. The boy frowned. "But you have an invitation, right?" The old man nodded slowly. The boy took his hand and said, "Then come with me. My father knows people inside." There was something so sincere in the boy's voice that the old man couldn't refuse. He stood up slowly, holding his cane, and followed him. As they approached the gate again, the guard stepped forward. One of them frowned and said, "Didn't we tell you to leave?" The boy spoke up before the old man could answer. "He's my father's guest. He has an invitation." The guards laughed again, shaking their heads. "Kid, you can't bring random people in here. Go back to your parents." The boy crossed his arms stubbornly. "He's not random. My dad said to bring him." The guards exchanged looks, unsure what to do. Before they could say anything, someone called from behind them. It was the boy's father, a man in his early 40s wearing a press badge around his neck. He was holding a camera and a notebook. He walked quickly toward the gate, his face serious. "Is there a problem?" he asked, looking at the guards. They straightened up, realizing he might be important. "No problem, sir. We're just keeping security tight," one said. The journalist looked at the old man and then at the medals on his chest. His expression changed instantly from confusion to recognition. He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on one particular medal, the highest honor in the country given only to true war heroes. He had seen pictures of that medal before, but rarely on anyone in real life. "Sir, may I ask your name?" he said respectfully. The old man hesitated, unsure if he should answer. I don't want trouble, son, he said softly. The journalist shook his head. No trouble, sir. Please, just your name. When the old man told him, the journalist froze. He pulled out the event list from his pocket and quickly scanned it. The old man's name was right there, listed as one of the honored guests. The journalist's eyes widened. You're supposed to be inside, he said in disbelief. The old man gave a faint smile. I tried. They said I didn't belong. The journalist looked at the guards, his face tightening. Do you have any idea who this man is? He asked sharply. The guards looked confused. He said he was invited, one mumbled. We thought he was... The journalist interrupted. He's a decorated war hero. The event you're guarding is being held in his honor, and you turned him away. The guards' faces went pale. The old man tried to calm the situation. It's all right, he said softly. They didn't know. But the journalist wasn't having it. That's no excuse, he said. They mocked you. They disrespected someone who risked his life for this country. The old man sighed, his voice quiet and steady. Maybe they just forgot what these medals mean. It happens. By now, a few more people had gathered near the gate, curious about what was happening. Some took out their phones, sensing something important. The journalist turned to the old man. Sir, please come inside. I'll make sure you get the welcome you deserve. The old man hesitated again, looking at the guards. They stood stiffly, guilt written all over their faces. One of them opened his mouth to apologize, but no words came out. As the journalist led the old man toward the entrance, the guards lowered their heads. The young boy followed happily beside them, proud that he had helped. Inside, the music had stopped, and a few organizers were rushing around, realizing a guest had been left outside. The moment the old man entered the hall, silence spread across the room. People turned to look, whispering as they recognized the medals on his jacket. The host on stage paused mid-sentence. The senior officer sitting in the front row suddenly stood up, his eyes wide. He rushed toward the entrance and saluted the old man instantly. The hall fell completely silent. The officer took the veteran's hand firmly and said, Sir, we've been waiting for you. We're honored to have you here. The old man nodded gently, still humble as ever. Thank you, he said, his voice calm. As they walked toward the front, the guards remained outside, frozen with regret. They didn't know it yet, but their actions were about to become a lesson for everyone watching. And for the old man, this moment wasn't about revenge or pride. It was simply about being seen again, not as a stranger at the gate, but as someone who had once given everything for his country and still stood tall, even when the world forgot his name. The large hall fell silent as the old man entered, guided gently by the journalist and the senior officer. All eyes turned toward him. Some people looked surprised, others ashamed. They had been listening to long speeches about respect and bravery, and now the very person who embodied those words stood quietly before them, humble and calm. The officer led him to the front row, offering him a seat beside the other decorated guests. But the old man shook his head softly. I'm fine standing, he said, his voice steady but kind. The host on stage hesitated, unsure what to do. The audience waited. Then the officer took the microphone and spoke, his tone serious and full of respect. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, before we continue, there's something you all need to know. A few minutes ago, a true hero was sitting outside this hall, unrecognized, disrespected, and kept from entering his own ceremony. The crowd gasped. A quiet murmur spread across the room. The officer turned toward the old man. This man, he continued, fought for this country many years ago. He received honors that only a few ever earned. His courage saved lives and his loyalty never faded, and yet just moments ago he was treated as if he didn't belong. The old man lowered his head slightly. He didn't want attention or pity. But the truth had already touched everyone present. The journalist captured the moment not for fame or views, but because he felt it mattered. He knew stories like this could wake people up, to remind them that real honor doesn't live in uniforms or medals, but in how people are treated every day. The officer invited the old man to speak, but he hesitated. What can I say? He asked quietly. The officer smiled gently. Whatever comes from your heart, he replied. The microphone was handed to him, and the old man slowly stepped toward the stage. Every eye in the hall followed him. His steps were slow but steady. When he reached the podium, he looked at the crowd, not with anger, but with softness and experience. He began to speak. I don't blame anyone, he said softly. The young men outside, they didn't know who I was. Maybe they were just doing their job. But this isn't about me. It's about how we see people. The hall was silent, every person listening closely. When I was young, he continued, I fought beside men who didn't care about who had more medals or who looked more important. We cared about helping each other, about standing side by side. Respect wasn't something we demanded. It was something we gave. He paused for a moment, his voice trembling slightly as he remembered. So when I stood outside today and they told me to leave, it hurt. Not because I wanted special treatment, but because it reminded me that sometimes people forget to look deeper. They see old clothes and tired faces, and they forget the stories those faces carry. A few people in the crowd wiped their eyes quietly. The guards who had stopped him earlier stood near the entrance, listening, their expressions heavy with guilt. The old man looked in their direction but didn't point them out. Instead, he said, I don't want anyone punished. I just hope they remember this moment. That kindness costs nothing, and it can change everything. Applause filled the room, not the loud kind that comes from excitement, but the slow, sincere kind that comes from respect. The sound grew stronger, echoing through the hall. The old man stepped back from the podium and nodded politely. The officer helped him to his seat this time, and he finally sat down, looking humbled yet peaceful. The rest of the event felt different after that. Every word, every speech carried more meaning. The people in charge decided to rearrange the program. They gave the old man a moment of honor, showing his name on the screen and listing his achievements. The audience stood again, giving him a long, emotional standing ovation. Some even came forward to shake his hand. Outside, the guards were still standing near the gate, silent. They knew what had happened inside. When the journalist stepped out after the ceremony, he saw them standing with lowered heads. He approached them not with anger, but with a simple question. Do you understand who that man was? One of the guards nodded slowly. We do now, he said quietly. We made a mistake. The journalist looked at them for a moment and then said, It's good that you realize it. But remember, you don't have to know someone's past to treat them with respect. You just have to see them as human. His words hung in the air for a moment before he walked away. Inside, the old man was surrounded by people thanking him, asking for photos, and telling him how honored they were to meet him. But he didn't let it get to his head. He smiled, spoke kindly, and reminded them that many others like him never got the chance to stand here. Remember them too, he said gently. They deserve the same respect. As the event came to an end, the senior officer walked the old man to his car. I'm truly sorry for what happened, he said. The old man patted his arm and smiled. You have nothing to apologize for. What matters is how it ended, not how it began. The officer nodded, touched by his humility. When the car drove away, people outside watched it go in silence. They knew they had witnessed something real, something that would stay in their minds for a long time. The journalist sat in his own car, replaying the recording on his phone. The old man's words echoed softly. Kindness costs nothing, and it can change everything. He knew he had a story that needed to be told, not to shame anyone, but to remind everyone. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, the old man reached his small home. He took off his jacket and placed it carefully on a chair. The metals clinked softly. He looked at them for a moment, smiling faintly. He didn't need crowds or applause. All he ever wanted was simple respect and the chance to remind others what humanity truly meant. He sat by the window, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. In his heart he felt peace, not because justice had been done, but because maybe, just maybe, someone had learned something important that day. Somewhere out there, those young guards would remember his face, his words, and his kindness, and that, he thought, was enough. The night grew quiet. The world outside moved on, but the story of what had happened that day was far from over. The journalist was already preparing to share it, unaware of how deeply it would touch hearts across the nation. The old man had no idea that by morning, everyone would know what had happened at that gate, and that his quiet grace would soon be me a lesson for millions. The next morning, the story of the old man spread like wildfire. The journalist's article was everywhere, on news channels, social media, and even morning radio shows. The headline read, "War hero turned away at his own ceremony, teaches everyone a lesson in humanity." The story touched millions of hearts, People who had never met the old man felt a deep respect for him. Some were angry at the guards, while others were moved by how calmly and gracefully the old man handled everything. At his small home, the old man sat quietly, sipping his tea as sunlight poured through the window. His neighbor came running, holding a newspaper. "They've written about you," the neighbor said excitedly. The old man took the paper gently and smiled when he saw his picture on the front page, the one the journalist had taken as he stood at the gate with his cane. Underneath, the words read, "A hero's dignity reminds us all what respect truly means." He didn't feel proud in a boastful way. Instead, he felt a quiet happiness knowing that his experience might make people think differently. He didn't care for fame or sympathy. All he wanted was awareness. He had seen enough in life to know that sometimes a small story can do what speeches and laws cannot. Meanwhile, at the government building, the atmosphere was tense. The guards who had disrespected the old man stood nervously as their supervisor read the article. They had been called in early that morning. "Do you see what your behavior has done?" the supervisor said sternly. "You embarrassed this institution, but more than that, you disrespected a man who gave his life for this country." The guards hung their heads. One of them muttered, "We didn't know, sir." The supervisor's tone softened a little. "That's the problem. You didn't know because you didn't care to look. Next time, look at people with your heart, not just your eyes." Later that day, the journalist visited the old man's home. He wanted to thank him for allowing the story to be shared. When he arrived, he found the old man watering a few plants in his small garden. "Sir," the journalist said kindly, "I hope you don't mind that I published your story." The old man smiled. "You told it truthfully. I have nothing to hide." The journalist handed him a copy of the newspaper. "People are calling you a national inspiration," he said. The old man chuckled softly. "I'm just an old soldier. If my story helps someone learn kindness, that's enough." A few minutes later, there was another knock at the door. This time, when the old man opened it, he saw the two young guards standing there, their faces filled with guilt and nervousness. One of them spoke first. "Sir, we came to apologize," he said quietly. "We were wrong. We didn't recognize you and we treated you badly." The other guard nodded, his voice trembling. "We read the article. We didn't sleep last night. We're so sorry." For a long moment, the old man looked at them without saying anything. Then he smiled and stepped aside. "Come in," he said gently. They hesitated but followed him inside. He offered them tea and motioned for them to sit. "You don't have to apologize," he said softly. "You were doing your job. You just forgot the part of it that matters most: respect." One of the guards looked down, ashamed. "You should be angry," he said. The old man shook his head. "Anger doesn't teach. Forgiveness does." They talked for a while, and by the end of the visit, the tension had melted away. The guards thanked him again before leaving, promising to remember his words for the rest of their lives. After they left, the old man looked at the empty cups on the table and smiled faintly. He didn't need punishment or revenge. Seeing them learn was enough for him. A week later, the government held a special event to honor him once again, this time not just for his bravery in war but for the lesson he had given the nation. The hall was packed with people from different walks of life. Journalists, students, officers, and even the same guards attended. The host spoke with great emotion. "Today we celebrate not just a soldier, but a man whose humility reminded us what true heroism looks like." When the old man walked onto the stage, the audience stood and clapped. It was not just a polite gesture, it was a genuine tribute. The sound of applause filled the hall and lasted for several minutes. He stood there, a little shy, but smiling. The minister placed a new medal on his jacket, a symbol of his lifelong service and the lesson he had given the nation. Cameras flashed, but the old man's focus was elsewhere. He looked around at the young faces in the crowd and hoped they would remember this moment. When it was time to speak, he walked slowly to the podium. The room fell silent. He spoke in his usual soft tone. "I am grateful for this honor," he began. But I want everyone here to remember something important. Respect is not given to a person because of their clothes, age, or status. It is something that every human being deserves. I didn't stand outside that gate to prove who I was. I stood there to remind myself that humility is also a form of strength. His words sank deep into everyone's hearts. He continued, "The young men who stopped me, they are not bad people. They just didn't understand. But they learned, and that's what matters most. In life, we all make mistakes. What defines us is how we correct them." He paused, then smiled. "When I fought in the war, I learned that courage isn't just facing danger, it's choosing kindness when you have every reason to be angry." The hall erupted in applause again, and some people had tears in their eyes. Even the guards at the back wiped their faces quietly. The old man nodded politely, thanking everyone before stepping down. The journalist captured every moment, knowing that this was more than a story. It was a message that would live on. After the ceremony, many people approached the old man to thank him personally. A young student said, "Sir, I want to be like you when I grow up. Not just brave, but kind." The old man smiled warmly and said, "Then start today. Kindness doesn't need age or medals." When he finally returned home that evening, the old man placed the new medal beside his old ones. They glimmered together in the dim light of his room. He touched them gently and whispered, "Maybe this is the respect we fought for." He sat back in his chair, feeling peaceful. Outside, the world carried on as usual. Cars moved, people worked, and life continued. But somewhere deep inside the hearts of those who had read his story or heard his words, something had changed. A simple truth had been awakened, the kind of truth that never fades with time. Respect, once given freely, has the power to heal and unite. The old man looked out his window as the evening sky turned golden. He wasn't thinking about the medals or the fame. He was thinking about how a small moment of pain had turned into something beautiful. And as the last light of day touched his face, he whispered softly to himself, maybe the world just needed a reminder. The following days were peaceful for the old war hero. The noise around his story had started to calm down, but the impact it left behind was deep. Schools, offices, and even television programs spoke about the importance of respect and kindness. People shared how the old man's story had changed their way of thinking. Some said they apologized to their elders, some decided to treat others more gently, and some just felt proud to live in the same country as him. At his small home, the veteran spent his days quietly. He took care of his garden, fed the birds, and often waved at children playing nearby. He didn't seek fame or attention. He just wanted peace. One morning, while he was sitting on his porch reading the newspaper, a car stopped near his gate. From it stepped the journalist who had written his story. The old man smiled warmly and greeted him. "You again," he said kindly. The journalist laughed. "Yes, sir. I wanted to see how you're doing. Your story touched so many hearts." They sat together for tea. The journalist told him about the hundreds of letters and emails that people had sent, thanking the veteran for reminding the nation about respect and humility. The old man listened quietly, nodding now and then. "It's good," he said softly. "Maybe now people will look at each other with more kindness." The journalist agreed. Before leaving, he said, "You've become a symbol of dignity, sir." The old man smiled faintly and replied, "I'm just a man who believes in treating others the way I'd like to be treated." A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from the head of the guards department. It said that the young men who had disrespected him were now part of a new training program, one that focused not just on discipline, but also on empathy and manners. The letter ended with a thank you for teaching them a lesson that no manual could. The veteran folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his drawer beside his medals. He looked at them for a moment and whispered, "Maybe this is what service truly means." That evening, his neighbor, a kind woman who often brought him food, came over with a surprise. "You're on TV again," she said cheerfully. He turned on the television, and there it was, a documentary about his life. It showed pictures from his army days, clips from the ceremony, and short interviews with people who admired him. The narrator's voice said, "His story began with disrespect, but it ended with a message that changed lives." The old man watched silently. his eyes reflecting both pride and humility. After the program, he went for a short walk around the neighborhood. People greeted him warmly. Some waved, some stopped to shake his hand, and children ran up to him with excitement. "You're our hero," one of them said. He chuckled softly and said, "No, I'm just your neighbor." But deep down, he felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The warmth of being valued. Not for medals or fame, but for his heart. One morning, he received an invitation from a nearby school. The principal wanted him to visit and talk to the students about respect and courage. At first he hesitated, saying he wasn't used to giving speeches. But the children's handwritten note attached to the letter made him smile. It read, "We want to learn from you." So he agreed. When he arrived at the school, the students welcomed him with flowers. They led him to the assembly hall where hundreds of young faces looked up at him eagerly. He spoke simply, just like he lived. Respect isn't something you give to people because of their rank or job. It's something you give because it's right. He told them small stories from his life and about helping his comrades, about the times he learned patience and about how forgiveness can make the world a better place. The students listened silently, their eyes filled with admiration. At the end of his talk, a little girl stood up and asked, "Sir, why did you forgive the guards?" He smiled gently and said, "Because anger only hurts the one who carries it. Forgiveness gives you peace." The entire hall clapped and a few teachers had tears in their eyes. Before leaving, the principal thanked him and said, "You've given these children a lesson they'll never forget." On his way home, the veteran looked out of the car window at the passing streets and thought about how unexpected life could be. A few weeks ago, he was standing outside a gate being disrespected. Now he was being treated like a national teacher of humanity. He didn't see it as revenge or redemption, just a reminder that kindness always finds its way back. Months passed and life continued peacefully. The veteran kept to his simple routine, morning walks, tea at sunset, and quiet evenings by the window. But now every so often someone would visit him just to say thank you. A soldier, a student, a mother, a stranger. All came with stories about how his lesson had changed their lives. He listened to each one with the same gentle smile. One afternoon, as he sat watching the sunset, he heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, he saw the same two guards who had once stopped him. They were in uniform again, standing respectfully. "Sir," one of them said softly, "we just wanted to see you. It's been months, but not a day goes by that we don't remember what you said." The veteran nodded with a kind smile. "That means you've learned well," he said. They talked for a while, sharing stories and laughter. Before leaving, one of the guards said, "You changed our lives, sir." The old man replied, "No, you changed your own. I just reminded you who you were meant to be." That night he sat quietly by his window, the cool breeze brushing against his face. He looked at the sky filled with stars and whispered, "Sometimes the smallest moments carry the biggest lessons." He closed his eyes, feeling at peace. Years later, people still remembered him. The story of the old veteran was told in schools, shared in articles, and spoken about in families. His lesson became a part of the nation's conscience. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the city, his house still stood, his medals shining softly in the morning light, reminding everyone that true respect doesn't come from power or position. It comes from the heart. And even though the world moved on, his story continued to inspire, a simple story of one man's patience, forgiveness, and the gentle reminder that respect, once lost, can always be found again through kindness.